What if the most powerful weapon in America's arsenal could reshape a war without ever being launched? Military history is full of weapons that changed battlefields through sheer destructive power. Nuclear weapons transformed deterrence. Stealth aircraft altered air warfare. Aircraft carriers redefined naval strategy. But occasionally, a weapon's greatest value lies not in the damage it inflicts, but in the uncertainty it creates before the first shot is ever fired. According to the fictional scenario explored in this analysis, that may be exactly what is happening inside Washington. Open-source discussions surrounding this scenario suggest that a formal request has been prepared for the possible deployment of the U.S. Army's long-range hypersonic weapon, better known as Dark Eagle. Whether such a request would ever receive political approval is another question entirely. But the strategic significance begins long before any launch order is signed. To understand why, we first have to examine the broader military environment surrounding Iran. By this stage of the scenario, Iran is already operating under pressure from multiple directions. Maritime traffic has become increasingly restricted. Economic sanctions have tightened, and sustained military operations have targeted key elements of Iran's command and control infrastructure. Instead of relying on one decisive strike, the United States appears to have constructed what analysts often describe as a layered pressure campaign combining economic isolation, persistent intelligence collection, naval dominance, and precision military operations into a single strategic framework. Within this fictional narrative, the maritime component is particularly significant. Reports inside the scenario describe an naval blockade that has severely disrupted Iranian energy exports. Tankers remain stranded at sea. Shipping companies face growing legal and financial risks, and billions of dollars in potential oil revenue have effectively been frozen. If those assessments are accurate, the consequences extend well beyond lost export income. Iran's missile programs, drone production facilities, and regional proxy networks have historically depended on consistent financial resources. Any prolonged disruption to that revenue stream would gradually reduce the state's ability to sustain military operations over time. Modern wars are rarely won solely by destroying equipment. More often, they are won by restricting an opponent's ability to replace what has already been lost. The military balance described in this scenario reflects a similar pattern. Rather than depending on a single carrier strike group, the United States has reportedly assembled multiple naval formations throughout the region, supported by submarines, long-range surveillance aircraft, airborne early-warning platforms, and continuous intelligence coverage. Such a deployment would provide commanders with the ability to monitor Iranian military activity almost continuously while maintaining substantial strike capacity if required. Yet despite this overwhelming military presence, one objective remains unresolved. According to the scenario, Iran has not accepted comprehensive verification measures regarding its nuclear program from a strategic perspective. That changes the nature of the conflict. Military pressure alone becomes insufficient if the political objective remains unmet. That helps explain why planners would begin looking beyond conventional strike operations. For years, Iranian military doctrine has emphasized survivability rather than direct confrontation. The leadership has long understood that competing head-to-head against American errant naval power would be extraordinarily difficult. Instead, resources have reportedly been invested in hardened underground facilities, dispersed command networks, and mobile ballistic missile launchers capable of relocating quickly after firing. Those mobile launchers represent one of the most important pieces of the deterrence puzzle. Instead of remaining exposed, launch crews could emerge from reinforced underground shelters, conduct missile launches, and return below ground before conventional air power completed the targeting cycle, even after bunker-busting bombs damaged fixed facilities. These mobile systems continued to complicate military planning because their exposure window remained extremely short. Within the framework of this fictional scenario, that survivability doctrine becomes the central problem American planners are attempting to solve. And that brings us to the weapon at the center of today's discussion. Dark Eagle is not simply presented as a faster missile. It represents a different approach to time-sensitive targeting, one that, if deployed as described, could dramatically compress the interval between target detection and strike execution. Understanding why that matters requires looking beyond headlines and into the engineering, operational concepts, and strategic calculations behind hypersonic warfare. That's where we'll go next. To understand why Dark Eagle occupies such an important place in this scenario, we need to shift the discussion away from speed alone. Hypersonic weapons are often introduced with one headline figure Mach 5 or faster. While that number certainly attracts attention, it is not the feature that concerns military planners the most. The real advantage comes from how hypersonic systems compress an opponent's decision cycle. In conventional warfare, every strike follows a familiar sequence. A target must first be detected. Intelligence analysts verify its identity. Commanders authorize a response. Aircraft are launched or missiles are fired. Finally, the weapon travels toward its destination, even when every step runs efficiently. Valuable minutes or sometimes hours can pass before a target is engaged. Against fixed infrastructure, that delay is often acceptable. Against mobile missile launchers, it can be disastrous. According to publicly available discussions of Iranian military doctrine, one of the country's long minus-term investments has been mobility. Rather than leaving ballistic missile systems exposed, launch vehicles are believed to operate from hardened underground complexes connected to protected road networks. Crews can reportedly move a launcher into position, conduct a launch, and withdraw before conventional strike aircraft arrive. If those assessments are accurate, survivability depends less on armor than on timing. The launcher does not need to defeat incoming aircraft. It simply needs to disappear before they arrive. That is where the fictional scenario introduces Dark Eagle. Unlike cruise missiles that fly relatively predictable routes through the atmosphere, hypersonic glide vehicles follow a very different flight profile. After an initial boost phase, the vehicle separates and glides at extremely high speeds while performing lateral maneuvers that complicate tracking and interception. From an operational perspective, this creates two major challenges for defenders. First, warning time shrinks dramatically. Radar operators may detect an incoming object, but the interval between detection and impact becomes far shorter than with traditional ballistic or cruise missiles. Every minute removed from the timeline reduces opportunities for commanders to evaluate information, coordinate defenses, and issue firing orders. Second, the weapon's flight path is less predictable. Conventional missile defense systems are designed around estimating where an incoming object will be several moments into the future. A maneuvering hypersonic vehicle complicates those calculations by continuously adjusting its trajectory, forcing defensive systems to update solutions almost in real time. Whether every claimed capability performs exactly as advertised remains the subject of ongoing public debate. Even so, military analysts generally agree on one broader point: hypersonic systems place extraordinary pressure on command and minus control networks because they reduce the time available for decision making. Within this fictional scenario, that characteristic has consequences far beyond the missile itself. Imagine an Iranian commander responsible for mobile launch operations. Previously, the commander could assume that leaving a bunker for 20 or 30 minutes created an acceptable level of risk. Conventional aircraft still needed time to receive coordinates, launch, transit to the target area, and execute the strike. Now imagine that assumption disappearing. Suddenly, every movement outside the shelter becomes a potential vulnerability. Every launch operation carries the possibility that a hypersonic strike could arrive before the vehicle returns underground. Notice what has changed. No bunker has been destroyed. No launcher has been hit. Yet the commander's planning assumptions have already shifted. This illustrates one of the most important concepts in modern deterrence. Military capability is not measured solely by physical destruction. Sometimes its greatest value comes from forcing an opponent to abandon the strategy they spent years developing. Defense planners often describe this as disrupting the enemy's operational decision cycle. Instead of reacting after an attack occurs, a new capability forces adversaries to rethink deployment schedules, logistics, command structures, and even whether certain missions remain worth attempting. In this fictional conflict, that may represent Dark Eagle's greatest strategic effect. If Iranian planners no longer believe underground facilities and mobile launch cycles provide reliable protection, then years of investment in survivability begin losing value overnight. And once that confidence starts to erode, the pressure extends well beyond individual missile units. It reaches every level of military planning, from regional commanders to political leadership. The next question, however, is even more important. Possessing a new weapon is one thing. Deciding when or whether to introduce it into an ongoing conflict is an entirely different calculation. That's where the political dimension of this scenario becomes just as significant as the technology itself. At this stage of the scenario, the question facing both governments is no longer which side possesses greater firepower. That answer has already become apparent. The more important question is whether either side can still control the pace of escalation. Military campaigns often reach a point where tactical victories no longer produce meaningful political results. Air defenses may be degraded, supply networks disrupted, and logistics placed under constant pressure, yet the opposing leadership continues to believe it can outlast the campaign. According to this fictional scenario, that is precisely where the conflict between the Western Coalition and the Republic of Air now stands. Months of economic restrictions have reduced access to overseas markets, Maritime patrols have limited commercial shipping. Long-range precision strikes have repeatedly targeted logistics hubs, command centers, and transportation infrastructure. None of those actions, however, have addressed what coalition planners identify as the most resilient element of AR-Dash's military posture, its dispersed mobile missile force. Unlike fixed launch sites, transporter-erector- launchers remain difficult to eliminate because they spend relatively little time exposed. Open-source military studies have long noted that mobility complicates targeting far more effectively than heavy fortification. A launcher hidden inside a hardened tunnel may remain vulnerable once identified, but a launcher that continuously relocates forces' intelligence agencies to restart the entire targeting cycle. Within this fictional scenario, AR-Dash's commanders exploit exactly that principle. Missile units rarely remain in one location. Instead, they rotate between underground shelters, concealed road networks, and temporary firing positions. Communications are intentionally decentralized, allowing local commanders to execute proplaned missions even if higher headquarters become isolated. From a defensive perspective, this approach increases survivability. From an offensive perspective, it creates frustration. Coalition surveillance assets may detect movement, but confirmation takes time. Analysts must distinguish real launchers from decoys, civilian vehicles, or deliberately misleading signatures before authorizing any strike. Every additional verification step protects against mistakes. Every additional minute also increases the chance that the launcher disappears again. This is where operational planning begins to shift. Rather than focusing solely on destroying launchers after they appear, coalition planners begin prioritizing the entire decision chain that supports missile operations. Fuel depots become valuable targets. Communications relays become valuable targets. Transportation choke points become valuable targets. Even maintenance facilities begin carrying strategic importance because they determine how frequently mobile units can return to service. Military planners sometimes describe this as attacking the system instead of attacking the platform. Destroying one launcher may remove a single threat. Disrupting the network that supports dozens of launchers can reduce the effectiveness of the entire force. According to this fictional scenario, intelligence collection also becomes increasingly persistent. Satellite imagery is combined with electronic surveillance, airborne reconnaissance, and pattern-of life analysis. Individually, none of these sources provide a complete picture. Together, however, they begin revealing routines. Convoys tend to leave shelters during particular periods. A supply of vehicles repeatedly follow similar routes. Communications activity increases shortly before missile units relocate. None of these observations guarantee an imminent launch, but they allow analysts to narrow uncertainty. That changing intelligence picture creates a difficult decision for AR-Dash's military leadership. Do commanders continue following familiar operational procedures, knowing those routines may already be understood by their opponent? Or do they abandon years of carefully developed doctrine in an attempt to regain unpredictability? Neither choice carries risk. Changing procedures may reduce operational efficiency. Maintaining them may increase vulnerability. By this point in the scenario, the conflict has evolved beyond a contest of weapons. It has become a contest of adaptation. History suggests that military organizations able to recognize shifting conditions and revise doctrine before circumstances force them to often preserve far more combat power than those that remain committed to assumptions that no longer match the battlefield. The final phase of this analysis asks a broader question. If neither side achieves a decisive battlefield victory, what ultimately determines the outcome of a campaign like this? The answer lies as much in economics, industrial capacity, political cohesion, and strategic endurance as it does in missiles, aircraft, or advanced technology. If this fictional scenario demonstrates anything, it is that modern wars are increasingly decided long before the final shot is fired. Military technology still matters. Firepower still matters, but neither guarantees success by itself. Throughout this scenario, both sides invested heavily in capabilities designed to solve different problems. The Republic of AR-Dash spent decades constructing hardened facilities, expanding underground infrastructure, dispersing missile forces, and preparing for a campaign built around survival rather than territorial conquest. The Western Coalition invested in a different advantage. Instead of relying on overwhelming numbers alone, it focused on shortening the time between detection, decision, and action. Every improvement in surveillance, communications, precision strike, and command integration reduced the amount of time an opponent could safely operate. That difference illustrates one of the defining characteristics of 20- first century warfare. The competition is no longer simply about range or destructive power. It is increasingly about decision speed. Military planners often describe this as compressing the opponent's decision cycle. Every minute removed from intelligence processing, every second saved in target identification, and every improvement in command coordination increases operational pressure without necessarily increasing the number of weapons employed. In this fictional campaign, that pressure gradually accumulates. Economic restrictions reduce industrial output. Persistent surveillance limits freedom of movement. Repeated precision strikes complicate logistics. Diplomatic isolation narrows strategic options. Individually, none of these measures forces an immediate political decision. Collectively, however, they reshape the environment in which every future decision must be made. This is why modern military strategy rarely focuses on a single decisive strike. Instead, planners seek to influence an opponent's entire system: industrial capacity, transportation, communications, energy production, financial resilience, political cohesion. Each element supports the others, and weakness in one area eventually affects the rest. From that perspective, underground bunkers, mobile launchers, and advanced missile systems become only one part of a much larger equation. They may preserve military capability. They cannot guarantee strategic success if the surrounding system continues to lose flexibility. Another lesson emerges from this fictional scenario: technology rarely remains dominant for long. Every new defensive measure eventually encourages new offensive methods. Every breakthrough in surveillance leads to new approaches to concealment. Every advance in missile defense inspires new delivery systems designed to overcome it. Military history is filled with these cycles of adaptation. Armor produced more powerful anti-tank weapons. Radar encouraged stealth technology.